So welcome everyone to the call. This is first of our S&M conversations, so named because of our initials, Steve and Michaela, in case you're wondering. No other reason. And the basic format, this is going to be the first in a series of calls we'll be doing to sort of support people through this time and to explore the themes that are coming up. Today, we'll do a little bit of talking at the beginning, and then most of it's going to be open to questions. We'll also be releasing, in addition to this, a whole bunch of resources over these coming weeks. Many of you know that I've been, in my podcast, ramping up the schedule, and for the last about 9 days, every single day, I've been posting interviews. I've been going back to my old guests, getting them back and posting an interview every day with them, addressing questions to do with the situation we're in. I've been asking them how to deal with anxiety or fear or panic, what to do about being sick, if you become sick, what to do about facing death, how to help others who are sick or afraid or facing death, and also tips to do with isolation. What do you do if you find yourself in a period of extended seclusion? And one of the guests that I recently had is the M of the S&M, So her episode was there, and that was very interesting. So if you haven't seen that yet, do check it out, because that's 45 minutes or so of Michaela's tips on all those topics that I just listed. We're also going to be releasing guided practices, some practice along kind of things. Also in Guru Viking Facebook, you can see live stream meditations where you can sit with me and dip in and out and meditate with me. Michaela's going to be leading all kinds of practices, live streamed and releasing videos and so on. So we are going to do our best to support you going through what the situation that we're in internationally. Michaela, did you want to add anything to that part?
No, just to say hello and thank you for everyone for joining us. We had an enormous amount of signups for this call, and I just came off a phone call with our study group participants, and also from Europe and at the US and Canada. And so we're going to do our very best to give as much support and also actual practices while we're all getting used to a kind of a very different new normal. So this call, as Steve was saying, will be answering questions, but you can also email us or post things on Facebook of things you would like addressed in general, and then we can see what we can do to support you on that.
Okay, so one of the things that I was going to bring up as we begin, one of the things I've noticed, and I wanted to see what Michaela's take on this was, fight or flight's a funny thing. Stress is a funny thing. And often I think we think of fight or flight and stress, acute stress like fight or flight, as something that happens suddenly, some threat or some trigger emerges, and then suddenly we're thrust into this high arousal state. Well, one thing that's also can be the case is there can be a kind of a accumulation, a sort of fight or flight ambush. Slowly, little bits of accumulated stress and concern coming. So I wanted to see what you had to say, Michaela, about ways to de-escalate from a kind of fight or flight and to come back to a sort of a more regulated state in full possession of your IQ points. Because the other thing about the stress states is that you lose IQ points, because you don't need IQ to run from a saber-toothed tiger.
Yes.
If you sit there thinking, which way shall I run? It's too late. You're eaten. It stops you thinking and you go that way,
Yes. I'll say a few general things, because I think these are things that are commonly known, but there are some nuances that are really good to know that I kind of just want to talk about for a moment before we start taking questions and give practices. Fight and flight, as you said, is a function of the nervous system that allows us to stay alive. It's not a function that requires a lot of smarts, because it was meant to protect us in the wild from actual threat, not the threat that comes from reading too much news or seeing things on the news that are very, very, scary. And that particular fight or flight cuts out your executive thinking or decision-making function, and it goes into instinct. And I've definitely noticed in the last week or so, even in the way people write emails to me or the way people interact, even on a customer service level, and a market increase in people's fight response. So, and that usually means aggression. People are way more aggressive, even with the things that they want, the way they express themselves, their need to be known or accommodated exactly the way they want to be accommodated. And that is the fight response, where because we're not actually fighting an enemy that we can physically combat, the general, kind of ready to go into battle makes people less reasonable, less thought out, and certainly also less compassionate, right, for others. Because of course, one of the main functions of fight or flight is every man for themselves. You don't take other people into consideration in fight or flight. And like you were saying, you might be off the baseline and not know you're off the baseline, even in fight or flight. Certainly in freeze, which feels like everything's fine, everything's actually okay. Oh, I'm doing okay. And then you sit down or you move your body and suddenly you realize that there's all this pent up stuff. So good strategies, I would say a good strategy in this particular moment in time is to assume you're not okay. And what I mean by that is not to be catastrophic about it, but to go, I probably need some extra stepping down. I probably need some extra self-care. I probably need some extra time in nature or some extra time de-escalating the nervous system, because it's a pretty safe bet that just the baseline anxiety is a lot higher than usual.
Yeah, don't wait until you start to get jangly. So what are some good easy strategies, like blinking, perhaps wiggling the fingers and toes, little things like that,
Yes.
that one can do on the spot?
Yeah. Well, in general, I think the knowing of fight, flight, or freeze, meaning the understanding that there is such thing, is useful. And then from there, the de-escalation in the simplest ways possible, like you said, blinking, making sure that you're blinking, making sure that your body stays moving, wiggling hands and feet, getting up, walking around, being able to rely on go-to routines. Anybody who knows me knows I'm a tea fiend. So the things like that, making that cup of tea, sitting down, feeling the heat of the cup on the hands, feeling the hands on the cup, taking a moment and drinking and feeling the liquid go down in the body, anything that can be done to bring sensation and attention back to the body.
Yeah, great. Okay, so I think we should turn it over to questions, actually, because
Yes.
I think we have so many questions. So
Yeah.
let me see here.
So I want to just say a few things about questions and possible ways to go. So some of the questions that were posed in our study groups today and also via email were things like, what do I do when I'm all alone, isolated, all alone, right? I don't even have a pet. I'm just home alone. And some people have asked questions around, what do I do? I'm stuck with my spouse 24/7, or stuck with my spouse, my children, and my mother-in-law 24/7. So there are strategies for all of that. And we can go into that a bit within the questions as well. And of course, any other questions you have that we can support you with in the realms of embodiment, meditation, relationship, organization. I want to do an entire thing on how do you organize yourself to work from home as like one call, simply because I think a lot of people are not used to that. So with the questions, if you can ask questions that are also helping other people, that would be preferable questions. But we will, of course, also answer things that are super personal if that's what is required. So,
Johanna, you are activated.
Hello, Michaela. Nice to see you. Hi, Steve.
Hi.
Can you still hear me? Yeah.
we can hear
Very
you
well.
fine.
Yeah,
So
this is the first time. Yeah, it's the first time that I'm using Zoom, but it's working great. I am all alone. I don't have a pet, and well, I actually don't have a question. I mean, I do feel alone sometimes, and I do get pretty a little freaked out and stuff, but I meditate for many years, so meditation is what brings me back. And yeah, I have a little bit, I can get into the panic mode by just thinking how crazy this all is, and a pandemic, and we never had this before, and it becomes really huge in my mind at times. But then somehow I manage to just stay and stick with my routines, and sometimes I cry and let it all out, and just totally let it be, that panic. But then I compose myself again, and it goes away, and then I feel centered again. So I'm just interested in the tools that you're going to share, and I'm sure there's some of them that I've never heard of, and will be grateful for them, and just to connect with you guys and be part of it is basically what makes me feel centered and whole again. So thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. We're going to mute you, and I'm going to say a few things that for everyone, and I'm sure Steve has a few things to add. The first thing to say is that if you happen to be all alone, right? So some people are, in Europe particularly, there is full isolation already, and people can't see anyone else. There's a few strategies that are useful other than your go-to practices, one of which is that if you can at all connect with nature, then nature is a good way to actively have contact with something that's not a human, right? Of course, if you have pets, you can cuddle your pets and hold your pets and be with your pets, which is physical contact. But if you don't have anyone to have physical contact with, two of the things to do is, this will sound so California if I say it like that, you can hug a tree. Meaning you can go to nature and touch nature. That's of course not the same as touching a human being, but it is a means of connecting with something living. It can be a tree. You could even lay on a rock. You can be on the ground, feel the sunlight on your skin. So another way of saying that is keeping the senses alive in the absence of sensory input from another human is very, very important. So touching things, smelling things, sunlight if available, listening, tasting, all the things you can do so your sensory system stays intact. And of course, you can connect with people in non-physical ways, but actually physical stimulation is really, really important, particularly if you're looking at a longer period of isolation. Another thing that you can do if you are stuck at home and you are getting a bit deprived, sensorially speaking, is self-massage. And there's, of course, many ways to do that. The simplest just being that you put oil or lotion on one part of your body or your entire body and really spend time engaging with the body and feeling how your hand touches the other hand or the face or the body, and also how the body reacts to that touch. And that's really, really important, so that that particular function, which is also one of the ways that fight or flight can be dealt with, is being actively pursued and not only noticed when you are already incredibly deprived.
Yeah. one of the things about meditation, you mentioned you do meditation, that's quite interesting, is that from a certain point of view, in terms of meditation, this sort of a situation is business as usual. What I mean by that is the stock and trade of meditation is human experience. Whether that human experience is happiness, peaceful feelings, blissful feelings, or other feelings like fear or experiences like sickness or whatever is the case, this is within the range of experiences meditation, if you want, is designed to deal with and designed to work with. And one of the interesting points about meditation practice is a little bit like exercise. There's different ways you can increase the, if you want, intensity of your meditation. One of them is to increase frequency, one is to increase duration, and the other is to increase the intensity of it itself. So for instance, frequency means you do it more often, duration means you do it for longer. And intensity, well, an intensifier, I think a pandemic could be called an intensifier, depending on your reaction to it, of course. So when you sit down to meditate, this is a general point about meditation, not necessarily to you, Johanna, but when you sit down to meditate, don't be surprised if you expecting to sort of begin to calm down, you actually feel more intense feeling. And that's not necessarily because the meditation is winding you up. It could be the fact that actually underneath, that's actually what's going on under there. There is some emotion, there is some stress under there. And so when you sit down to meditate, you in fact connect or contact that reservoir of feeling and emotion. So in that case, it's a little bit like when you're working out at the gym. You could think of a situation of stress as a kind of like putting a few extra plates on the bar. So now your bench press is heavier, which if you're training is one of the interesting effects, of course, is you need to do fewer reps for the same result. So a good thing about a stressful situation is that when you do meditate, if you do sit and practice, even if it's for a shorter amount of time than you normally would be able to, 5 minutes, 60 seconds, 10 minutes, something like that, because of the added intensity that's going on, you actually get more bang for your meditation buck.
Okay, Katrina.
Perfect. Hi, Michaela, and hi, Steve. So great to have a little quick chat with you. My question is, I'm about to host a group of students in these times, and my background is being a yoga teacher and working with the tantric practices. And in my own case, I feel like I've surpassed the anxious phase, and I feel very hopeful, and I feel like my cup is overflowing. But at the same time, I sense that my students are still at a different frequency. And my question is, how can I best support them and hold them as I'm meeting them through Zoom next weekend? And how can I stay empathic to their experience?
Steve, you or me first?
I think perhaps you, Michaela.
Okay. Okay. So, it's funny because I just got off a call with some of our students, and it's particularly interesting to see people from many different countries, on these calls. Like this call has people from all over the world. And the thing to take into account, as you said, is people are at different places. It's very different, the stress level when your 2 children are home than when you're home alone, right? But that's a different kind of stress. It's very different when you're somewhere where you can still go out into nature, or you're in a city where you can't go out at all, and so on, right? So there's some people who don't have enough food in the house, or they no longer have an income. And particularly in America, where there isn't really much of a support system, people are looking at not being able to pay their rent in a week and things like that. So to assume that people are in a different place than you is a very, very good thing, right? Very, very good thing. And I think the way to be with that, and this is true for this call as well, is to just support people with the things that you can support them with, without that being oh, you must do this, or this is not good, or you should feel like this, but to essentially allow everybody their experience and give of yourself in a way that can be useful to the people who come to you, right? Which is, they usually come to you for your expertise. And if you can give them their expertise without any shoulds or musts or ideological aspects to it, it will be hugely calming and comforting. And for most people, just having a forum to connect with people who are of similar interest is enough at the moment. So that's my take on it.
I don't have much to add to that. I mean, depends, of course, what you're teaching, but one of the best empathy tools is to listen. Come in with a plan, but and stick to what you know. You know, and you don't have to be necessarily the fairy godmother of the pandemic with an answer to everything. But and if you know, and I think your teaching experience will orient to the new medium. You know, sooner or later, you'll get your chops that you have in live teaching together.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Katrina. Good luck on your call next week.
Okay,
all right. Alex Davis. We just need to, okay.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Hi, Alex.
Yes. Yeah, thanks to you both. I guess my question is about what I'm finding in my reaction at the moment is really wanting to have kind of a comforting contact with my partner, almost like a kind of a motherly kind of contact with my partner, and that's not that conducive in terms of polarity to sex. And I'm just wondering how I could kind of work with that and introduce a bit more polarity into our connection right now.
Are you isolated at the moment? Do you have to be together all the time, or is it more a situation of you know, you're coming and going? What's the actual situation?
We're both kind of isolating, and we're both working from home. We're not kind of confined to the house. We're in the country, so we can go out. We can go out into nature and so on, but we're not really in contact with anybody else physically.
Yeah. And you don't have children?
No, we have a cat.
Okay.
No children.
That's a child of sorts.
A kitten. Yeah.
Well, I think the important piece to understand and know is that, let's see how I can say this. Polarity is not all that it's cracked up to be in a crisis situation. And what I mean by that is one aspect of fight and flight, or fight or flight, I should say, is that in some people it produces an almost exaggerated sexual response. And in some people it produces the exact opposite, right? And so some people under threat get just, you know, hypersexual, and some people under threat, it doesn't happen at all, and it doesn't want to happen. And there's reasons for that, of course, because evolutionarily speaking, when you're about to die, being able to maybe procreate before you die is a fairly good body strategy. And of course, on the other end, if you're not of that kind, conserving your resources and not exposing yourself to additional requirements and interactions is, you know, also a very healthy strategy. So it depends on where you sit. So if you're together all the time and it feels like you need a bit more of the, let's say, mothering is not, I would say, soothing or connecting kind of activity, I would just let that happen to begin with. Because in times of great stress and uncertainty, the most important thing is to have the nervous system have as much of an equilibrium as possible. But then when if this should happen to go on for a prolonged period of time, then the way to work with that would be to create a bit of distance before you re-engage, so let's say erotically. So that would mean maybe going out in nature separately or spending time in separate rooms, and not rolling everything in at once. And what I mean by that is particularly when people are not used to being together all the time, it becomes this kind of amorphous blob of common activity. And that, of course, is the killer of any kind of sexual attraction over time. So when you feel like you want to do that again, and also in general, for general sanity, regardless if you're with a partner or not, having some sort of schedule and some sort of delineation of activity within a day is super useful, because then you can go, okay, well, we've talked about work, we've done the chores, now we're going to do something for our body, then we're going to spend some time away from each other, then we're coming back together to do something that's more erotically charged. So that's how I would handle it, but I certainly wouldn't put a lot of pressure on the actual erotic sexual polarity part to begin with. It's much more important that soothing, nourishing happens, if that's what you need.
Okay, thank you.
Does that, any questions on that? Are you good?
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, unless Steve's got any thoughts on that.
No, I think Michaela covered it quite well.
Okay. Thanks to you both. Thank you.
Thanks,
you,
Alex. Okay, so we have Jennifer. Jennifer Gallardi.
Unmute myself.
Oh, good.
Hi. How are you all?
Good.
Good. I am lucky that I am, like you, Michaela, I have access to nature. I live in Topanga. And I don't mind the situation. I haven't minded it for the past week or so, because I'm used to working from home, and I kind of like it until I don't. I have a tendency to isolate anyways, and it's not good for me. And when I realize I'm doing it, I had other places to go. I would go to the gym. I literally would make trips to the grocery store just to see people. And I find myself like dipping too much sometimes into the spiritual and not staying grounded. And you gave some great tips. I mean, I have a cat, like I enjoy all these things, but going on too long, it actually starts to work against me emotionally and mentally. So my question is, if you have any other ideas, like last night, something happened with me. I was fine until Thursday night. And I think I wrote in the comments, I have a tendency to freeze. Like, I think everything's fine and, oh, I'm used to this and blah, blah, blah. And then out of nowhere came the tears, and yesterday was really rough. And I've been doing yoga nidra every day and doing all my practices. And then I came home and had a drink and started dancing and felt much better. Actually doing the things that most people find a slippery slope for me I'm kind of the opposite. So I'm just wondering if you have any other things aside from drinking. And I do dance, I turn on my music. I know how to do that. I guess I'm just looking for additional things that maybe you would recommend, because the physical is no longer keeping me, tethered. We don't have a lot of the physical contact, and that's what tends to keep me tethered.
Yeah. Steve, you want to say a few things, or shall I start?
No, it looks like you're geared up for a response. I know that look.
Well, there's a bunch of stuff, right? So like I was saying earlier, being in nature, touching nature, self-massage, self-touch, super important.
Yeah.
There is some people now that do online sessions, somatic body workers and stuff like that. That's of course not as good as the real thing, but that is always an option. And then I just found out we have a dance studio, like they teach every kind of dance class imaginable. They are now streaming, and I did that last night. I did a streamed Bollywood dance class in my living room, which was absolutely hilarious, and gave me a whole other appreciation for actually doing, because I would never go to a class in town for many, many reasons. Now I get to do it at home. It's like an introvert's heaven. But of course that also only lasts as long as it lasts. So another thing that I find personally very useful, and that I've heard people already talk about, is to be of service. There is ways to be of service that are not grand. Not everybody has money to give, and that's not actually that kind of service I'm talking about. But there's a whole bunch of organizations where you can sign on to speak with people who don't have someone to speak to.
Oh, good. Okay.
Elderly people in retirement homes that have closed down, where the kids no longer can come visit. People in isolation in Italy. There's a whole system in the UK where you can sign on. There's many, many places where you could go and say, okay, for an hour a day, I'm going to speak with someone who I don't even know, but I'm going to give them the gift of that. Or it might be somebody you do know.
That's so interesting. Sorry, I just got an email from LA Works, and I hadn't opened it yet, but one of the things they're saying is telesocial program to help social. Okay. Yeah, that's lovely. Thank you.
Because when we get so contracted into our own needs and our own situations, it's really good to kind of do the outreach. And even though it's not physical, it still will tether you also in another reality, because you were saying you can go a little bit spiritual there, and that's all good, right? But it's also good to kind of nuts and bolts, like go down to the level of, wow, there is somebody in my neighborhood who doesn't have anyone, or I can connect with this person via LA Works or whatever, right? So that's one way. And then the other thing that we're doing up here, I'm in the area that had the fire, so we're kind of a little bit geared towards community action. But so we have organized up here to make sure that people actually have food, because of course some people don't have an income right now. And so we have our own private food bank up here where everybody donates their citrus fruit and whatever they have in the garden, and other people bring that to people. And then there's also people who buy gift certificates from the restaurants that are about to go under because they don't have business for takeout, and give the takeout to people who don't have an income. So there are things one can do that make you socially connected in different ways than you're used to. And I think that's really, really crucial in this time, so that we don't all go into, dog eats dog, everybody for themselves kind of mode, which has a really negative effect on the body as well.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. I already feel like that is the ticket for me.
Good.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Jennifer.
Mariana Lauria.
So I've been mostly doing okay. And some time ago, I came back to Brazil, where my parents live. And when I got here, I started putting loads of things in place so we could isolate. Brazil was a few weeks behind what's happening in London, where I live. And so I was the driving force here at home, and I was quite pleased and happy with it. I have a grandma who is 98, and she moved in with us. And until last night, when I kind of contemplated the idea that I could get sick, and I literally started freaking out, not knowing what could happen with my parents, with my grandma, the idea of contaminating them. And Yeah, I'm feeling it so strongly in my body right now that usually in the past, I don't think I ever felt like this. And in the past, I'm a good problem solver. I would try to find solutions. And in this case, I don't find any. And I'm part of this women's study group. So I've been doing the practice in the evening. And then last night was the first night where I did not want to engage with it. I did it, but I found myself not even being able to move properly. Yeah, that's where I am at. So if you have any suggestions of how I could take myself out of this paralyzed place that I find myself, would be helpful. And thank you.
Thank you.
You're on a roll, Michaela, I think.
I want you to say some things because I know you have good strategies. But in general, and this is for everyone, right? I'm going to say a few things because Mariana is in the study group. And one of the things that we do in the study group is something that I'll be teaching quite extensively in the next couple of weeks, which is a practice called moving what you're feeling. We've actually posted a guided audio version of that on my Facebook page already, and we can post it with this call as well. And so moving what you're feeling is a practice where you're essentially, you can do it standing or you can do it on hands and knees. We do both. Where you're essentially closing your eyes, you're keeping your eyes closed, and you're feeling into your body, and you just move whatever you can feel in the body. So you could move as the stuckness, or you could move as the numbness, or you could move as the anxiety. And sometimes it's just a feeling in the chest, or it might be an emotion, or it might be a looping thought. And the whole idea is that as you allow the body to move, the body can process differently than your mind can. So it's called nonlinear movement, and this particular practice is called moving what you're feeling. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. But in moving what you're feeling, you're essentially translating internal sensation and emotion and even thought into movement, which then allows the body to process and to release and to wash out. So the good thing about having a daily practice is that when the going gets tough, you have something that you already have kind of a memory of, or a muscle memory of, that you can fall into. But of course, when the overwhelm gets really, really high, the first thing we want to do is shut it down, right? So that is the freeze mechanism, or the flight mechanism, where you just run away and you hide in a corner, or things of that nature are fairly normal in moments of overwhelm. But the key is to, at that point, kind of up the practice, regardless of how much you don't want to do it, and good for you for being able to do it. But you'll essentially go, okay, well, clearly I don't want to do that because I'm hunkered down. I don't want to feel. It's too much. And then, of course, the natural inclination is to not move and not do anything, so you don't have to feel. But that just makes it, stack up till it gets you. So the key is to just continue very, very lightly and go a tiny little bit longer than you think you want to go, so your body has a chance to unwind things. And then in addition to that, do all the things you can do to step down your nervous system: extra sleep, extra hydration, extra nutrition, extra movement, being out in nature, having a bath or a shower, meditation, dancing, listening to music, doing hobbies, all the things that allow the system to kind of find its equilibrium and for the stress level to go down. So that would be the best thing to do when you find yourself escalated and freezing from that.
Thank you.
Welcome, Mariana.
Thank you.
All right, Sineva.
Yes, hello. So
Oh.
good to see you, Michaela and Steve. I'm very happy and grateful to be here with you. Thank you. I always well here, and I also almost sometimes feel guilty because I'm enjoying so much.
You're in Paris still.
Yes, I'm in Paris, but we are isolated and for at least one more month. But I'm taking the opportunity to do all my creative things and be in my space and do practice and take care of the health and food and enjoying all these things that you might not have time to do otherwise. But I was wondering if you have an idea to how to structure the practice of nonlinear movement, for example, for 1 month. If you have ideas of, for example, how to divide it in so you feel like you have a plan or a structure to follow, that would be very inspiring.
Good. That's
Sure.
Steve's wheelhouse because he's our unofficial retreat master.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's a few things to off the top of my head that's come to mind when you say that. The first thing is in any kind of practice, movement kind of practice, meditation sort of practice, or even other sorts of practices, one of the really important things in normal life is to have a daily practice. I call it a sort of golden through line. And I like to say that the golden through line, your sort of minimum, should be something that's really easy to do. Now, some people, when they're setting their minimum, and I'll tell you how this fits into, say, you're going to do a month of more intense practice, why it's relevant, I'll say in a moment. Most people, when they come to they want to increase their practice, there's an ambitious element to their practice, they move the goalposts of the minimum. So let's say your daily practice is, let's just say 15 minutes of movement, just for argument's sake. And they say, okay, I want to do more practice this month or more practice this week. And then they move their minimum as a way of kind of forcing themselves to try to catch that moving target, to try to extend to reach that additional thing. And that can work for some people. But another interesting strategy to do is to retain your minimum, your daily practice at the same level. And what that does is that when you've finished your daily practice, you've won. You have this positive feedback loop of victory because you've done your daily practice. Now, what are you going to do with the rest of the day? Well, you've got now this other plan of practice to do, but it's bonus practice. It's sort of practice that's bonus. So every moment of practice you do past your minimum, whether it's another hour or an 8-hour, a day kind of retreat, is kind of bonus, and it has this feeling. And what that can do is can produce this sort of very positive snowballing effect of feeling like you're actually winning or having victory or doing well, right? It's sort of another psychological approach to consider. So the first thing I would say is that it's good if you can start early in the day. One of the things that can happen if you're in a sort of solo retreat situation, which is what you might be considering this if you're doing some more practice over a month, is that the day can get away from you. That first session, if you can sneak that one in early, then very often the rest of the day has let's say, a more productive tone from a practice point of view. So what's early? Well, for some people, it's right when you get up. For myself, for instance, I like to, when I get up, coffee, practice, especially if I'm by myself. Otherwise, what can happen is get up, coffee, check the phone, go to Facebook, do that thing I was going to do, read a book, look at the swans. Now it's 3 o'clock. I don't know. And another tip I would say when it comes to this sort of a more intense practice, you don't immediately have to start with your full schedule. Let's say you have an ambition to practice, say, 4 or 5 hours in the day. You don't have to go straight into 4 or 5 hours in the day, especially if, as it looks like the case may be, we're going to have some time. I'd say take 2 or 3 days to just add an hour or add a couple of hours to your practice and have this kind of relaxed, I call it the on-ramp, a relaxed sort of on-ramp. And then you have a certain date, 2 or 3 days in, where, okay, now that's when your retreat schedule will begin. And that's when you'll begin your more regular kind of structure of practice. And then also what's quite handy to have is an off-ramp. An off-ramp is, say, 2, 3, 4, depending on how long the retreat is, days at the end, where you do start doing less practice and you sort of allow yourself to have some more unstructured time. And you basically what you're doing is you're kind of coming out of retreat mind and preparing to reintegrate. And one of the things that can be useful if you have an undetermined amount of time in isolation is to make small focused retreat periods. So let's say you decide, okay, I'm going to do, say, a 5-day retreat of one particular technique. If you're talking about nonlinear, it could be 5 days of moving what you're feeling. Let's say you're going to focus on that. And then you take a couple of days off at the weekend. And then maybe the next week you say, okay, now I'm going to do another mini retreat, 2, 3, 4, 5 days. And I'm going to work with release, or I'm going to work with pleasure, or something like this. You can take certain themes. You don't even need a theme. You can just say, I'm going to do 3 days of retreat style practice, and then I'll have the remaining 4 days in a lighter kind of practice schedule. So in other words, you're sort of dipping in and dipping out, retaining your stamina. Those are some good tips. If you're talking about how to structure the day, there's many options, but 4 sessions a day is a traditional approach that's often used. But it should be adjusted to your temperament and to what you discover when you're actually doing it. So let's say you wanted to do quite a bit more practice. Maybe you say, okay, I'm going to have 1 session before breakfast, and then 1 session after breakfast, an hour, then 1 hour sometime in the afternoon, and then 1 hour in the evening. Or if that's too much, you say, I'm going to do my half an hour normal practice in the morning, then I'm going to do an hour practice after breakfast, which is part of your, if you want, retreat practice. And then after lunch, you do an hour. That's another sort of working session, retreat session. And then in the evening, I'm going to do 20 minutes, half an hour, more sort of relaxing. So in that way, you still have those 4 sessions, and you've got a lot of time in which to place them, but you can adjust the lengths accordingly. Those are some things to play around with. In my experience doing solar retreats, and I've done a fair few solar retreats, just trying it out, trying some different combinations out, setting a target, occasionally falling short, occasionally succeeding. That in itself is a valuable learning process. There's an art to solar retreat. There's a sort of a method to it, and it's something. So those are some off the top of my head thoughts about solar retreat.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Very inspiring.
Okay, Erica.
Hi there.
Hi there.
Hi from Montreal.
Hello.
Hi, I'm so grateful for you both for hosting this. It's a huge relief to hear from professionals who have so much to offer in this crazy time. I have a pretty rigorous daily practice. I do classical tantric yoga. I do about two 30-minute practices a day. And I also do a lot of actually jade egg, which I've been finding really beneficial and nourishing. I was hoping you could maybe share some type of ritual for when I'm feeling really like grounded in my body and clear and optimistic. Something maybe to help maintain that, or like almost like a practice that's a ritual that can sort of help maintain touch with that if I feel that I'm kind of modulating out of that. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, it does to me, Steve.
To make what is the thing that you want to try to enhance? You broke up a little bit there.
Sorry, when I'm aware that when I feel that I'm like that this subtle shift is happening where I'm losing groundedness, or I'm losing a sense of flow, and I feel myself slipping very slightly into anxiety, other than just dancing, or I usually just dance, and I have a little girl and we dance around a lot. We're pretty much in isolation. I'm wondering if there's a ritual or something. It could be movement based, or something in with your experience that you recommend that could offer sort of like an extra boost to tune into, that would offer like you know, like almost like a layer of protection, or like something like that?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Steve, do you want to talk about that, or shall I, or what would you prefer?
That sounded like the inhale of a woman who had a good answer. So that's
Okay. Well, the thing to be said about that is that you can't expect that that's not going to happen, right? Meaning, if you are not freaked out, you're probably numb.
Right.
And what I mean by that is it's pretty uncertain times and pretty extreme circumstances. So the part of you that is an organism, right, wants to survive, and the part of you that is a mother wants your child to survive. And so you will have spikes of anxiety, and you will have spikes of you know, fight or flight or freeze or all of those kind of things. It's not a matter of never feeling those things,
Right.
because they're also useful. If you don't have those, if you're just coasting all the time, you're not going to be motivated as an organism to take care of yourself and to feed yourself and to wash the hands when you go outside and all of that, right? So it's actually good. It's good to feel the moments where you feel perfectly fine and the moments where you don't, and kind of live in that polarity of those two spaces as a means of knowing that you are functioning and alive and stuff like that. So that's the first thing to be said. The second thing to be said is that you can pick any ritual of your liking to do at the end of when you feel really good. So for instance, let's say you are doing your yoga and then you are done and you're in Shavasana and you're feeling really, really good in Shavasana, and you want to prolong that feeling or use that feeling as an anchor. So what you would do then is you would connect that activity with another activity that kind of anchors that feeling down. So that could be kind of a ritual cup of tea at the end, or you have a bath, or you have a shower, or you massage your hands or feet, or you know, something that has to do with the senses that you kind of add on while you're really feeling good. So then later on, when you're having a moment anxiety, you can do that activity without having to do the entire 30-minute yoga practice.
Great.
So that's how I would do it, and do it for myself, is I just have an add-on that's a couple of minutes, and I have a million of them. You know, one of my favorites is drinking tea. And then that brings me back to that particular state.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful. Yeah, an anchor, I think. Yeah,
exactly.
The anchor is what I was looking for, just different ideas, and which I've been doing actually, but to do it with intention.
And just be a bit more formal with it, and then that will make it, you know, link it in. So.
Great.
Okay, thank you, Erica. Nice to speak with you. And Steve will mute you, and Dennis, I think, is next. And then we're almost done with the call. I think we can probably do a few more minutes.
Okay. Dennis, you are live.
Thank you. Hi,
You're like a radio show host, you know. So, Dennis, where are you calling from? What's on your mind?
Yeah, so Michaela, you mentioned talking about living with children and teenagers. And I would love to hear in general about how to do that. I have this young, beautiful teen girl who's full of life and energy, and who is very disorganized, as they are, and doesn't want to have routines imposed. And I find that over time, I can live with that, and we can handle things. But over time, I tend to be, you know, to get angry, and I have to leave the room and settle down. It's more or less like the baseline we're talking about, that I can be with it for a certain amount of time, a couple of days, and then it's too much. So I'm interested in any general strategies how to live with teenagers and girls, and of course also keeping the baseline in place.
The thing to be said about this in the context of what we're talking about, which is people being stuck at home, is that, of course, and we see this also out and about with people being out and about, right? Who can't really have any reality on it. When you are a teenager or even a young adult, you don't have reality on getting sick or dying or infecting other people or
Paying the rent.
Or paying the rent, exactly, or having to
making your bed.
Exactly, right? So
showering with a sufficient frequency.
Yes, all of those things, right? So essentially, you can't expect her to understand what it's about, right? Because she's not, and of course, the function of a teenager is to be unbelievably self-involved. Because that's what being a teenager is all about, right? It's a phase that has to happen.
There's a process of individuation that
yes, exactly. And so that said, Dennis, the best thing you can do is step away, because you can't actually make much inroads into that, except, and these are some of the things you might consider. One of the things you might consider is upping everybody's exercise, right? In the form of, I don't know where you're living these days, but if you can, you used to have a place at the ocean, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, long walks on the beach, if she likes it or not, right? Moving around more than she usually would, giving her things to do that she'd enjoy, but that are projects, right? And doing things that make her have to consider something else but herself, right? Whatever that is. And my guess is as good as yours probably, because she's a teenager, but anything you can find that is kind of project-based for her, and then anything you can do to have her move a lot more than she possibly wants to move. But aside from that, the best thing you can do is step away, because you're not going to create massive behavior changes in a teenager, regardless of the circumstances, till much further down the line, meaning when the circumstances are a lot worse than they are now.
A couple of strategies to refresh yourself in regards to that, in regards to her or anybody who's getting on your whiskers. Some things that I like to do if people get on my whiskers, which happens sometimes because I have very big whiskers, so it's easy to get on them. One of them is that I found, call it what you will, praying for a person. Very interesting. Very interesting. Now, of course, prayer would only be a modality that's suitable to those whose belief system or worldview would allow for such a thing. But to actually sit down and say and write and either make a list of blessings or good things and pray those into the person, or to sort of go more free flow, praying to God or Allah, whatever is your thing. But the point of that, the modality there, is this sort of deliberate generating of positive content towards the person, or in a sense, reframing, reminding yourself of your, of course, largely positive orientation, dipping the bucket into the well of the deep love that you have, which, is not to say that boundaries and strategies in a behavioral relational context aren't appropriate. Michaela was talking about that. I'm talking about what you can do for yourself so that it doesn't start building up this resentment. That's one thing. Another thing that's interesting is to do very similar, a lot of traditions have this, and I know you are an avid practitioner of various traditions, and you'll know that, is things like in Buddhism, they have certain loving kindness practices where you sit there and you do the Brahma Viharas, for instance, the 4 divine attitudes, the 4 divine abodes, where what in that Brahma Vihara practice, for those who don't know, it's very interesting. You start traditionally with yourself. You go through these 4 different things: loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. You do it for yourself, and then you do it for the loved ones. Then you do it for people you sort of basically know. Then you do it for your enemies, and then you go out further and do it for dogs and cats. But that's the full practice. But you can do it for a person in a targeted way, like a surgical strike, like NATO loving kindness in a way. Anyway, and you sit there and you repeat the phrases. They use these meta phrases, and you can find them on the internet. And I know you know that, Dennis, but I'm sort of saying this now for everyone as well. You say something like, may my daughter be happy. May my daughter be safe. May my daughter live at ease. And you repeat that. May my daughter be happy. May my daughter be safe. May my daughter live at ease. And even just repeating that phrase very often can cut through or penetrate or loosen the combative feeling of having been, in a certain sense, perhaps disrespected, getting all this back chat. And then compassion. May my daughter be free of suffering and free from the cause of suffering is a phrase that's used. This is, a different way of praying, you could say. It's the same basic sort of idea. Sympathetic joy. May my daughter be happy. And may her happiness ever increase. And you sort of repeat that phrase and repeat that. You can take one of these attitudes, or you can go through all 4. And then equanimity. You say, my daughter is the heir of her karma. Her happiness depends on her actions and not upon my well wishes for her, which is an acknowledgement of the fact that, yes, you do have well wishes for her. And that's part of the reason you're sort of pinned. If you didn't care, you wouldn't be bothered, but you do care. So therefore you're sort of triangulated by your own heart, in the crosshair of the difficulty. So you're acknowledging that, yes, you do deeply care, but you're also acknowledging that she is the heir of her own karma. You're very interesting to clarify the responsibility where it is and the limits of your control. Because the problem is you care a great deal, but you don't have absolute control. So, that's the problem, isn't it? So that's really wonderful. And that's actually that's an interesting practice to do even for oneself, to sit there and say to oneself, very useful at time stress, may I be happy. May I be peaceful. May I be safe. May I live at ease. And you start to sort of turn that kindness, that gentleness, that tenderness on yourself can also be very, very nurturing, especially if you're in a situation where, where you're having to do all the looking out for everyone else and it doesn't feel like anyone's got your back and you can't step it down. That's a very interesting practice. And then finally, something which I think you'll like as a meditator, and that sometimes you're getting back chat from somebody, or someone's saying something that's really getting on your whiskers, as I mentioned before, these whiskers in particular. Something that can be interesting to try is to actually meditate on the sensations that reveal the presence of your, in this case, daughter. So that means tuning in, say, to the visual, looking at her as if for the first time. Suddenly the narrative part is a little bit looser. And what I found that sometimes can happen is that angry energy can become quite humorous. One can feel humorous when one reorients to something like that, or listening to the sound, the rise and the fall, and the sound and the silence of whatever trash she's talking, like a sonic massage. Now, these are not necessarily methods that bypass the need to have, say, boundaries or good relationship conversations. This isn't sort of, meditating into some passive state, but it's ways to, when you are stuck in a situation and there's a limit to what you can do, or you're in a situation and you want to get more of your IQ points back, which of course, when you're angry and activated, it's less easy to think nimbly and to think creatively and to actually, make a productive conversation. So these things are not to make you passive. They're to help you when you can't do anything about it, or to help you make the most of the situation with retaining as many IQ points as you can in that sort of a way. Of course, the more you do it, in a certain sense, you have your retreat practice right there in your own house. You have your retreat menu, which is this situation in a sense. So if you're stuck with it, you may as well work with it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Thank you.
And then the last thing I want to say about that is for all of us teenagers, young and old, you know, I think in a situation like this, there has to be a juxtaposition between a good structure and also a bit of give, right? So this is true for teenagers, this is also true for us left to our own devices at home, where you're essentially having to go, okay, there's certain things that I'm going to structure, and then there's also a certain amount of just letting things happen and letting a kind of a creative process unfold, because too much structure for children in this particular moment in time isn't that good either, because then they get just too bogged down. And of course, letting them just go wild, also not good. So for all of us, I think having a loose schedule, but also leaving in that loose schedule a bit of time where you can just let it all happen is quite important, so that both aspects are attended to. So yeah. Okay.
I've been asked to repeat those sentences, but we're a little short on time. So what I will do, those Brahmi Vihara sentences to do with loving kindness and equanimity and so on. Oh, someone's posting a link anyway. Yeah. I mean, if you type in Brahmi Vihara sentences, there's lots of different versions, but I will also post something under the recording of this as well as a resource. So yeah, how are we doing for time, Michaela?
I think we'll end here, but we'll do more of the Q&A calls. We'll also be doing conversations. Steve and I will be doing some conversations on certain topics, like how do you maintain a relationship and not kill yourself or each other, or how do you work from home and get structured. I really want to have Steve expand and add to home practice and stuff like that. So please feel free to email us or text, message us with questions. We'll announce the next set of calls and stuff on Monday, and we'll send this out, of course, so that people who weren't able to join live get it. And so thank you very much. It was very, very good to see so many names we know on this call, and quite a few people we don't know yet. So thank you very much.
So thanks everybody for coming. It's nice to see so many familiar names. Yeah, it was a real pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Bye, guys.